bearing with the lack of standards. There's a joke there. My name is Whitman. I'm here to follow up from Chris to talk about the dissemination side of the house. And I think it serves this group best to just talk about what we're doing from a dissemination standpoint at Census going forward in terms of public data. So we're not going to be talking about FRDCs or anything like that. Really just about what data are going out in the form of our public website, some of our public applications. If you may be familiar with American Fact Finder, Data Ferret, these types of applications, typical bread and butter dissemination applications that Census has been using for some time now. And we're going to be covering what we're going to be doing in the next couple years to move forward with the idea of how do we make our data a little bit more open and a little bit more consumable. So straight off the bat, the vision is just to make our data more discoverable, accessible, and consumable. And I know that discoverable has been talked about already today, and I think that it's been noted that it's a fundamental, really challenging problem that data especially has faced over the years, especially with data going online and more data and more compute being available to the typical user. Anybody now can spin up an S3 bucket, throw up a couple terabytes of data, and then put a UI on top of that and serve up a mountain of data that a couple years ago we would never even dream about doing at scale like that. And so with this mountain of data going online, how do we get people to the right data? That's one of the biggest problems that we're facing, especially with Census, where we have so much business logic going into what data cell to use. I mean, to the point earlier about ACS, when someone goes to consume a cell of data, you go to Google and you type in a question about population, for example. Google will tell you a different source than Bing will, than Siri will, than Amazon will. And so that has the compounding effect of when you ask your phone, hey, Siri, or whatever, whoever I don't know if anyone uses Siri, give me the answer to this. 1, we don't know the provenance of that data. 2, we don't know the vintage of it. 3, we don't know if it's the right one. And 4, we don't know if we're talking about the right geography. All of those factors go into making the right decision for that end user. It's really easy to make that mistake. And for an end user who looks at the census data, they might not see the silos that we have. Moving on to accessibility, making sure that the data can be accessed in any shape or form. This is a big one because we consider it like if it's on the web, it's accessible, but there's a maturity model that we need to think about when we're putting data out there and making it accessible. Accessible to whom? Right? Like, do you have to be a desktop computer, or can a machine read it? These types of fundamental questions are important when considering the end user and who's actually consuming and accessing the data. The last bit is consumption, and the question there is, what do people do with the data once they have it? Are they mashing it up? And are they mashing it up, and do they have the right metadata to make that informed decision about how they mash up that data? Do we deliver it in the right format? Are people forced to look at metadata through PDFs, or can they access it in another format that is a little bit easier to use when you're working in Excel or Python or a Jupyter notebook? So all of these things we're trying to consider in this path forward. The challenge is that we have a ton of different collection pathways. We have numerous MDRs across the organization, not only on collection, decennial, but across all the different program areas. Everyone has their own metadata repository. We have geo MDRs, so that's a whole other barrel that we need to cover. And then for dissemination, we have our own MDR as well. All of those complexities are inherently challenging for an end user who has to try to sift and see that data flow from collection to dissemination. And then lastly, it's the fact that we organizationally have structured ourselves into silos, where one area may not operate or interoperate with another area for good reason or bad reason. And the problem there is that the user looks at census data, or they see census, and they just see census. They don't see all the different areas and all their different purposes. And that's one of the problems, because we force folks to understand our business and how we work rather than just trying to get into the data, which creates a significant barrier to the point where we go out and we interview folks to say, how did you get the data that you're looking for? And they usually say, we have someone that we ask. They always need a buddy to follow up to say, is this right? Can you check my work? Because I'm not confident, based on the way in which I've gotten the data, whether or not this will be the right answer. So our approach is pretty simple. The first thing is we want to turn our focus to the consumer. So the folks that are actually trying to get at the data are the folks that should be driving our requirements and how we work. For a long time, we've seen dissemination as the end of a pipe, where we collect it, we process it, and then we disseminate it. But what we have realized is that with that approach, we've lost touch, or we don't have as good of a touch as to our user base, and importantly, our non-users, the people who just ask Google, what's the population of whatever. They're our non-user base, and there's a tremendous thirst or appetite for that data, but we're not reaching that group. The second approach is we need to dog food what we're creating. So all the services and platforms that we create, we tend not to. Dog fooding? Yeah. Sorry, that's a great point. Dog fooding is a jargony tech term that I shouldn't have put in this deck. And all it means is that you eat your own dog food. That's the expression. What it means is that when you create something, it's very easy to just like, oh, it's out, good, done. But we are forcing ourselves to consume our own services, because when you do that day in, day out, you become really tuned to what annoying things that you've created, and that just grates at you. Every little detail that you may miss will bother you until you fix it. And so it's a good motivator to try to fix it. And strangely enough, we do this incidentally and randomly. Like, for example, if we need to produce some sort of a thematic map comes up a lot, we'll actually go out to Tiger Services, download that, and then manipulate those public data, and then pull from AFF or the data API and merge all that. So we are doing it, but it's not programmatic, and it's not systematic. We don't do that at an organizational level to say we must consume our own dog food so that we identify the bugs and make it better, make it easier for us to use. And the last one is to leverage open source community and standard. So much good work has been done, and engaging that community is a force multiplier. If we can get the tools into the hands of others and solicit their effort and work with them as a collaboration rather than it being more of a unidirectional conversation, we can start to encourage people to provide feedback and also provide code or provide thought on what we're doing. And so those are our three approaches going forward. The current state looks like this, and it's illegible on purpose. But what you're seeing here, every circle represents some sort of data dissemination thing that we have out there. I say thing loosely because I don't want to say application. Some of them are just websites. We have an FTP. We have a lot of mainline ones that are more popular, like American Fact Finder or QuickFacts. But we also have a ton of single-use case applications, like my congressional district. Its one job is to basically provide a DP table for a congressional district geography. Basically, it gives you an idea about who's living where at the congressional district level. And that's great because we've identified all these use cases, but what's not great is that we have different operations to get data into those applications. We have different application life cycles where we may update that application every 6 months or every 12 months. We have different data release schedules for those applications because each application requires a unique set of metadata and a release set of data in certain specific formats so that it can be ingested and then disseminated by that application. That's a lot of work for everyone from the developer to the business owner to the program area who has to do all the work to deliver the data to that application. And what's worse is that we can have different answers across all these different applications because they can always get out of sync. We have one being tomorrow, and it must be updated with application code. We have another that just rolls, so we could have updated data on AFF or the API, but not on the FTP, and vice versa, which leads to a lot of confusion because if someone is going about and getting their data from different sources, they may all be correct, and that's not a position we want to be in. Also, it's not sustainable. It's a lot of work that we don't necessarily have to be doing. The future state is to centralize it, all through a centralized platform, and making sure that we can consolidate and provide a process choke point in which all the data and metadata must go through. And that way we can provide far better standards and controls as to when data are released. And so you can update your application whenever you want, but as long as you're touching the centralized API platform, you will be okay, or at least we'll have a better level of control over that. And we want people to start using our API, ourselves included. So when I say dog fooding, I mean when we build another application, we need to use that API and understand, how is it working? Does it do what we need to do? Can I fetch the right geographies or whatnot? And then we want other people to do it. And that's, again, enlisting the open source community. We want people to take our data and run with it and enable other ideas. We can't cover every single use case. So, if we can just provide a core set of really functional capabilities, we can see a lot of good work being done by others. So we have a program dedicated to this entire effort called SEDSI. I'm not going to explain the acronym because it's too long. We have too many acronyms in the government, and census is just as bad as everybody else. Center for Dissemination. Just leave it at that. And their whole mission is to figure out how we can better serve our customers through data dissemination. And we're starting, again, with a centralized core set of key functionality through an API service layer. This includes a basic search capability, and this list is outdated, and we're trying to consolidate it. But essentially, the idea is that if we can provide a core set of APIs that could be supportive of a lot of our different user needs across our dissemination platforms, we'll be able to, again, to pull in all those different applications into a single into a single platform. And then we prove it out through a front end. This is our first beta version of our application. We update it every 40 days or so, 40 business days. And really the intention of this front end is to drive requirements back to that platform to say, hey, I need to do this service, we need to make it happen. And from there, we daisy chain the requirements through the different teams in a way that, okay, so the service layer needs to be able to provide a pseudo-geography list. I want to know all counties within the United States. I need a list of that. Well, we can go back to the data provider and say, we need to start delivering our data in this way because it will enable that type of service. And so we try to connect our data providers with our end user business case. And when we do that, we can start to see adaptations to our products so that we can actually deliver a better service in real time with our data consumers at the forefront of that idea. Now, I'm just going to walk through the application properties for now, really simply. We broke it down into a basic search type functionality, kind of similar to a Google or a Bing experience. We have segmented it out by content type. So the first one you're looking at is the All tab, and that's essentially the idea is, as a user, I want to understand something about some concept. But I don't know if I have a lot of depth I need right now. I just want to get a broad idea about what you guys have. And so up here we have a single search bar. That is the core part of the application. That is trying to parse natural language into some sort of identifiable code set or topic list or some idea that is understandable. And here we have a commute in Maryland. And what's cool is that we can start to play with the idea of how can we get data and metadata together and make these ideas a little bit more understandable to the novice user, someone who's just approaching the bureau with data or with the question. That's a really powerful opportunity for us to convert them into someone who wants to be a more regular user. So if we use this single search bar to capture them as they've been trained by Google and Bing, we can take them to first the opportunity to give them the exact answer, which again can be anything. Right now it's providing an answer, but we are thinking, well, that's a good opportunity to say answer general questions about ACS if we have one. So this area is really about just trying to answer the specific question. Over here, where we want to provide contextual information. So if there is something that is somewhat tangentially related to what you're interested in, we can provide that. And then below, we list out all the different content types that we have in order. Now, this is a little bit more germane to a lot of our basic data dissemination work is the tables that we've released. And so if we are going to be replacing American Fact Finder or Quick Facts or anything that has a tabular-based system, we need to be able to provide a table. But also we need to be able to provide the metadata behind that. This is our opportunity to, again, pull people in, show them the content right away, and then also provide actionable metadata at the cell level whenever it should be necessary. One of the powerful things here is that because this is all dynamic and data-driven from the API, we can start to append any kind of jam values that we may have, any kind of appendices to we can have notes. All of this can be explicitly tailored to a cell level, far better than any kind of print or prior application where oftentimes you'd have to reference it and treat it like a footnote. We want this to be much more interactive. You can interrogate column cells and start to get at what does this actually mean. And one thing I don't have here, but I think it's worth mentioning is we're also working on Data Ferret, which is a microdata access tool. And there we want to start actually bring in far more specifics about how the question was asked. Again, kind of going off of the question we were talking about earlier, is there a way to provide even more context to how this value was generated? And when we can link all of these systems together, we have that opportunity. It's not there yet, and there's a lot of metadata work, and there's a lot of work with the data providers to see if we can get that into a structured process. But if we can build the platform and show the capability to do it, we have a lot better chance of actually pulling it off than if we were to just start to dictate, hey, first we need to get the metadata in order, and then we can start moving down the pipe. Secondly, we know that all of our data needs to be able to be mapped. Really common use case, especially in folks with smaller municipalities. We actually see a lot of municipalities who will pay for a service that can map because they don't have a dedicated GIS team, or they don't have a dedicated data science team that can go in and work with our data. We wanted to kind of cut out a lot of those intricacies and do whatever we can at the web level. As long as we don't require any specialized software and we can open source all of this, it's really powerful for some of those smaller use cases. And then lastly, for now, we're indexing a lot of our web pages. This is our first foray into unstructured content indexing, but it's a very powerful step into starting to talk about other unstructured content. And by that I mean publications. It's a really important opportunity if we can consider what it looks like from a centralized platform where we can say, here's a publication that relates to these data or relates to this view of data. And we can link these all together through the metadata in the system. We have a really good chance of starting to show people how to cite more appropriately and how to reference our data more appropriately. This is one of the more powerful things that I'm really excited about when working with folks in this room, specifically about how we can start to tie all these data together in a more reproducible way. Julie Lane was showing Jupyter Notebooks. And something that's incredibly powerful in that idea is that it explicitly shows your work, it shows your code, and it shows your references. Where did you get this data? How did you process this data? And where is this result coming from? There's nothing more explicit than that, and really powerful stuff. When you see it in academia, you're seeing attachments of, if you're lucky, some data, and if you're really lucky, the code that was used to process that data. We want to encourage that kind of behavior. We want to see what tools we can put into the hands of researchers to quickly cite our data, have persistent links to that data, and show others how they did what they did. And I'm gonna hurry up because we lost a lot of time. The last thing is just a general a method to show folks what kind of content we have about a specific area of interest. So right now we have a bunch of what we're calling profile pages, and this one's a state profile page. But what's cool is that once we've harmonized all the data into a single platform, we can basically pivot onto any different facet that we have in the data. So right now we're doing geography, but we are going to be moving into topics. We had NAICS codes mentioned earlier. We can start to show folks what kind of data exists at this level. And again, all of this is referenced and interlinked within the application. So if I scroll down a little bit, this isn't live, but I scroll down a little bit, I can go to the table where that value is coming from, and I can start to interrogate it and manipulate that data really quickly. And then again, getting folks to use our API. I'm going to move a little quickly, but in reference to what we're talking about here, here are some of the things that we're working with. We're working with our APIs metadata repository, so that's data web. We're working with the AFF presentation metadata, so how these products need to be visualized. It's incredibly important to make sure that end users have that data because they can oftentimes misalign the table or show manipulations that should not be applicable to that type of table, and so we need to provide that structure to the end user. We're also working with the content management system for unstructured content metadata, and we will be indexing furthermore into the subtypes that they support. we're using external practices. Right now, obviously, DCAT is something that we've been subscribed to for some time now. We're moving into DDI from the dissemination side of the house. One thing that hasn't really been mentioned here is schema.org. It's an important, classified as a microdata metadata standard for web, so for hyperlink and hypertext data. It allows search engines to be more precise with how they parse your website. A lot of the data that they're used to is just in a markup format, so we're going to subscribe to that same structure in the new application, such that any crawling application, it doesn't have to be a search engine, can better understand and parse the content on our website. It's just another way to get to the data. And then lastly, we're working with geography to develop standards and working on our FIPS codes and resolving our summary level issues. Generally, I think the underlying problem with summary levels from a user's perspective is that we have specific geographies that may exist across multiple summary levels in that same geographic space. And the distinction between the summary levels can confuse the user when they're trying to interrogate a specific location. And so we're playing around with ideas to resolve in a GeoMDR structure down to the entity level and show it's mapping two different summary levels, and also talking about grids. A couple of cool ideas there. Basically, the goals are just a couple things. We need to maintain the data integrity, increase interoperability where applicable, and importantly, letting folks know why it's applicable or not interoperable. Improve our discovery, encourage citations, reduce inconsistencies, and drive inspiration. And the last piece I've folded just because the fewer impediments we impose on end users to work with our data, the minute they have to slow down, open a PDF, go to census.gov to try to find the metadata that they need for that data, that's a real problem. We want folks to be able to work fluidly and work with their ideas rather than having to constantly spend 80% of their time, 90% of their time just getting the data cleaned up and into a format that they can start to work with. We want to lower that significantly, and we think we can make some progress there. Here is the future state we'll be releasing in the next calendar. Again, this area I want to stress is any type of content. It is not an answer. It could be specific metadata about a question that you have. We're building this platform for flexibility, and we're building the services for flexibility. Again, more metadata available for the end user, how to call the API, how to cite it. All of this data, or all of these functions need to be persistent on any site where we have data available. All of these are persistent URLs, so as you go to them, they will live forever, and you can always go back to them. You can customize them, and all of those changes will be recorded. Again, beefing out our mapping capability, making sure that we have advanced functionality so folks can get to what they need, providing more standards on how things should be displayed, and visualizations are one of the standards that we're working on. And then again, publications being an important linkage here. The better we can show these linkages, the better we can see the data actually producing or being referenced in publications. And I think that's a real incentive for us. The better we can show the linkages between our data and the outcomes and the outputs that occur with these data, the better it is for our data providers. And then lastly, subscribing more to this idea of supporting scrapers, supporting harvesters. So, we were talking about CCAN earlier with data.gov. That is scraping from these types of services, and we need to provide a better, more cohesive set of services that aggregators can look at, pull from, and reference us. That will allow us to get into their systems rather than we having to constantly deliver to them. They can just subscribe to our services, and their data will be updated with our updated services. Hacking Google and Bing is another big point. With schema.org, we can pull off stuff like this. Getting our website in as a featured result rather than it being, left up to chance. The more intelligence we can build into their systems, the better it is for us because people are getting the right answer. And then, lastly, supporting these aggregators. I can't stress how important this is. Our subscription services must be scraped by everybody because we can't deliver to everybody. We need folks to come to us. We need them to get the authoritative set of what's available, and our services and our platform can do that. But the big motive here, and I know a lot of folks who have spoken already have motives, and my motive was always I wanted to get feedback from this group, specifically as what metadata needs to be incorporated into this platform. What metadata would you like to see incorporated into this platform? What standards would be more helpful? We are supporting a lot of JSON and XML, but is there other types of approaches that you would like to see in terms of file formats for scraping? Whatever questions you have or whatever feedback you might have, I'd love to hear it. We are iterating on this. Every 40 days we release new data, or new code, and so the more feedback we get, the better products we get. So with that, I'll stop for questions, and thank you guys. So,
let's repeat the question for those.
Question was, what happens to standard error and data quality in a platform like this? And that is treated as data to us. It is as data, just like any estimate value. Yeah, well, so those a little old. We have margin of error included where applicable, standard errors where applicable.
Well, wait a second. They're always.
Okay. From a data provider's perspective, we've worked with the data providers, and ACS is a good example where we have ensured that it's always at least one click away, no matter where you are in the application. So you can, within one click, you should always be able to access the standard error or margin of error, whatever is applicable to that specific cell that you're looking at.
Not all surveys produce that.
That's right. So that's why we need to be.
It's still applicable, even if they don't produce it. It may not be applicable to you,
well,
the person building the system.
Right.
It's applicable
to the data user, and that's why we work very closely with our data provider to make sure that from their perspective we are delivering to the letter what they require their data user to see. Yeah. Of course.
You can put data out. What makes the Census Bureau's data different is we deal with quality.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's lots of estimates that we produce that do not meet our own quality standards.
That's right. That's right.
We don't flag those in any way. We could.
Well, are you suggesting that if the survey doesn't provide standard it's not presented in? It's not his problem.
Yeah, that's
right. It's not his. It's not his.
That's right.
Right. But when we're thinking about making data available to people, I think as the Census Bureau we have a responsibility to let the people know about the quality of that data. And mapping is where it gets really tricky. Right?
Yeah.
I've got two states that are different colors.
Mm-hmm.
That's sending the message that those two states are different when in fact they may not be different.
Well, I mean, we can go into all the different break types can send a lot of different messages, which is why I brought up the visualization standards, because this is an important thing that we don't see done very well is for mapping specifically. Depending on what tool you use, some tools have very specific or opinionated positions on what breaks you should use depending on the data, or not depending on the data, which is a big problem. Are you log correcting or are you just throwing up janks and you're cool, right? And then you get that problem of, well, these two states are inches apart, but they're displayed quite differently because you only did 2 breaks or something like that. And further, I love your point's really well taken. I think we have an obligation, or we have an opportunity to tell a richer story when we talk about accuracy and we talk about standard error, because I think there's interest in that margin where oftentimes people think this is the answer and that's it. Well, no, there's a richer story to that, and we can approach telling that story in a better way than I think just ignoring it, which is oftentimes the case.
Another big challenge here, and I worked on first and second AFF, so you're cleaning up my message.
We're stealing a lot of your ideas. Don't pretend.
Not all our data users are equally important, right? The seventh grader comes to Census Bureau one time to get an estimate for their 7th grade research paper and never comes to the site ever again. It's different from a member of Congress that's the appropriations committee.
Well, that's unfair. You can't use Congress. But I'm arguing with you about the 7th grader because I want to get them early. I want to get them hooked because we have really interesting stuff, and
But some of the reason why there's such a mess, why you have
yeah,
that thing downstream where you can look all the way to disseminate data.
yeah,
Some of that there are political reasons, big P and little p political reasons
Yeah.
why we have so many things, because there were problems that we had to address, and that was the way to address those.
I think I'm getting kicked off the
Special
stage.
people needed special things.
All right, thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
And our next presenter is Todd Gardner. He's a survey statistician from the Center for Economic Studies at the U.S. Census Bureau. He received a Ph.D. in history from the University of Minnesota in 1998. While in Minnesota, he helped develop an iPoems, an integrated database of public use census microdata dating back to 1850. In addition to performing research supported the Census Bureau with historical decennial census and household survey data sets. He collaborates with external researchers on projects using linked data through the Federal Statistical Research Data Center Network. He's also working in collaboration with Minnesota Population Center to harmonize internal microdata files in a format consistent with iPhones.
Can you start talking without your slides?
Well,
It should be.
Just until, okay, so I'm going to give you presenter control, at which point, let's see, you can bring up your slides and then share. So I guess you know how to do that, right?
Best you just do it for him.
Well, I have to go do that back there. So you can bring up your slides here.
Okay.
Dan, where's Dan?
Yes, glad. All right, are we good to go? Or
If you have presenter now, or should yes, you got it. And you should be able to share your
what do I do? Share application right here.
Yeah.
please.
No, well, yeah, I think you could do it there. I usually do it up with the menu thing.
What you got there?
I'm not all that much of an expert, but, okay, we'll call in, and, oh, okay, that's it.